My father named my sister co-CEO of the company I built for 10 years. But when she proclaimed herself CEO at his birthday party, I revealed I own 53% of the shares, and all the designs worth $30 million. I'm 34 years old. I'm the CEO of a custom furniture company worth like $30 million, and there are still people who think my older sister is the one who built all of this. The truth is, I need to tell this story because what happened like 2 years ago at my father's birthday party basically destroyed what was left of our family, and even though it sounds dramatic, I swear I'm not exaggerating even a little bit. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I was like 22 and had just finished college, my dad, Benjamin Reynolds, had this super small woodworking shop on the outskirts of town, you know, one of those places with sawdust everywhere and the smell of fresh wood that stays in your clothes. He made custom furniture for local clients. Nice stuff, but nothing fancy. And he made enough to pay the bills, but it's not like we were swimming in money either. My sister, Catherine, who's 3 years older than me, had gone to study for an MBA at an Ivy League university and was working at a consulting firm in Chicago making I don't know how many thousands of dollars a year, and my dad wouldn't stop talking about how proud he was of her. Catherine this, Catherine that. Catherine just closed a deal with some important company or whatever. Meanwhile, I had studied industrial design, which, according to my dad, was nice but not as serious as business. And when I told him I wanted to help him with the shop, he kind of looked surprised, but said okay. If I wanted to waste my time there, that was fine. The first few months, I basically learned the trade. I mean, my dad taught me how to use the tools, to understand different types of wood, to make the joints correctly, and all that. I would arrive like 7 in the morning every day, stay until 6 or 7 at night, and honestly, I loved it. But what I saw was that my dad was doing everything the old-fashioned way. You know what I mean? Clients would come in, describe what they wanted, he'd make a super basic sketch on paper, and then build the furniture hoping it would turn out how the client imagined it. Obviously, sometimes there were problems. The client would say, "Oh no, I imagined it differently," and my dad would have to make changes that cost time and money. One day, I think it was like 6 months after I started, I proposed using 3D design software so clients could see exactly how their furniture would look before we started building it. My dad looked at me like I had suggested we sell the shop and move to Mars. But after a lot of insisting, he agreed to let me try it. And it worked incredibly well. Clients were fascinated to be able to see super realistic renders of their furniture, they could request design changes before we cut a single piece of wood, and projects started coming out much faster, and with zero costly mistakes. We started growing, first by word of mouth, and then I made a basic website where I showed the designs, and suddenly we had clients coming from neighboring cities. By the end of the first year, we had already hired 2 more carpenters and an administrative assistant. My dad was happy, sure, but there was always this tone of surprise in his voice when he talked about the business, like he couldn't believe that his daughter with the not-so-serious degree was making the shop grow. By the 3rd year, we already had revenues of like $2 million, which for a business that had basically been a one-man show was pretty impressive. I had implemented a complete customization system where clients could choose not only the design, but also the type of wood, the finishes, the hardware, literally everything. I hired a graphic designer to improve our social media presence. We started appearing in local decorating magazines, and I basically converted my dad's little shop into a real company with processes, systems, and everything. I worked like 70 hours a week easily. I handled the design, the sales, the team management, everything. My dad was still the face of the business and supervised production. But let's say I was the brain behind the operations. Catherine would come visit us like twice a year, for Christmas and maybe in the summer if she had time. And there was always this weird dynamic where my parents, especially my dad, treated her like she was this super important executive who was honoring us with her presence. At family dinners, Catherine would talk about her projects in Chicago, about the fancy restaurants she went to, about her business trips to Europe or Asia, and my parents would listen fascinated. When it was my turn to talk about the business, my dad would say something like, "Oh yes, Sophia has been helping a lot at the shop," and change the subject. Helping. Like I was an assistant or something, not the person who had tripled the revenue in 3 years. Fast forward like 5 more years. I was 29 years old, and the business was no longer a shop. It was Reynolds Designs, a company with 45 employees, a showroom downtown, and contracts with boutique hotels and high-end restaurants to make all their custom furniture. We were billing close to $15 million a year, and I was practically the CEO, even though my dad was technically still the owner on paper. We had never formalized my position because when I suggested we update the corporate structure, my dad said it wasn't necessary, that we were family, and that those legal things only complicated everything. Looking back, I should have insisted more, but at the time I thought I was being paranoid. Everything changed when Catherine called my parents and told them she was tired of the corporate world and wanted to come back home. She was like 32 years old, had been in Chicago for almost 10 years, and according to her, she wanted something more meaningful, more connected to family. My parents were super excited. My mom, Anna, literally cried with happiness on the phone. And when Catherine casually mentioned that she'd like to be more involved in the family business, my dad said, of course, that it would be wonderful. I was there when this happened, sitting in my parents' living room, drinking coffee, and I felt like an alarm in my head, but I didn't say anything because, she was his daughter too and had a right to be interested in the family business, right? Catherine arrived like 3 weeks later with all her stuff in a moving truck and temporarily moved into my parents' house while looking for an apartment. The first week she went to the office every day. I showed her the operations, explained our processes, introduced her to the team. She asked a lot of questions, took notes on her iPad all the time, and had that way of talking she had at the consulting firm, using words like optimization and synergies and value proposition. At first I thought she was just trying to understand the business, but then I realized she was basically auditing us like we were one of her corporate clients. The thing is, my dad was absolutely delighted to have Catherine there. One day he came to the office and announced, without having consulted me about absolutely anything, that Catherine would be co-CEO with me. Co-CEO. I just stood there in the conference room trying to process what I had just heard, while Catherine smiled and said something about how exciting and how much she was going to learn from me. I told my dad we could talk in private, and when we went into his office, I asked him, what the hell? Why hadn't he consulted me about something so important? He told me there was nothing to consult, that Catherine had an MBA and experience in corporate strategy, and that it would be good for the business. I reminded him that I had built all this practically by myself, that I had converted his shop into a multi-million-dollar company, and he interrupted me saying, yes, that I had done a good job with the operational part, but that now we needed to take things to the next level, the operational part. Like designing, selling, managing 45 employees and growing the business from 0 to 15 million was just the operational part. I left that office feeling like I'd been kicked in the stomach, but I tried to be optimistic. Catherine was my sister. We had grown up together even though we weren't super close, and maybe I could learn something from her corporate experience. Spoiler alert, it was a huge mistake to think that. In the following weeks, Catherine started bringing in a marketing team, branding consultants, and even a professional photographer to make new promotional material. All this without consulting me. She would just show up at team meetings and announce the changes. When I questioned something, she would say things like, we have to modernize, or we can't keep doing things the same way. And my dad always supported her. Literally always. The straw that broke the camel's back, or rather the nuclear bomb that destroyed everything, was at my dad's 58th birthday. My parents organized this big party. At an event hall, they invited like 150 people between extended family, friends, important business clients, suppliers, everyone. I arrived after work, coming straight from a meeting with a new client that was going to mean like 3 million in contracts. And I was excited to tell my dad. There was a small stage where they were going to make speeches and toasts, and after my mom said some super nice words about my dad, Catherine went up on stage without anyone inviting her. And there, in front of everyone, Catherine started talking about Reynolds Designs and about the exciting changes that were coming. She said she was very proud to announce that she was the new CEO of the company and that she was going to take the business to new heights with her strategic vision. CEO, not co-CEO. CEO. I was standing there with a glass of wine in my hand, completely frozen, thinking I had heard wrong or that it was some weird joke. But she kept talking, thanked my dad for trusting her with his legacy. I mentioned her MBA and her experience in Chicago. And this is what still makes my blood boil when I think about it. She said something like, my sister Sophia has been a great help in keeping operations running all these years, and I hope she continues to support from her role, support, operations. People started clapping because they didn't know what else to do. Several clients looked at me confused because they knew perfectly well who had been managing everything, and I simply put my glass down on the nearest table and walked toward the exit. My mom tried to stop me, grabbed my arm and said, "Sophia, please don't make a scene." And I told her I wasn't going to make any scene, that I was going home, and that tomorrow we were going to have a very interesting conversation. My dad didn't even follow me. He stayed there smiling like everything was perfect, while Catherine kept talking into the microphone about her plans for the company's future. That night, I didn't sleep. Literally 0 hours of sleep. I stayed in my apartment making coffee after coffee and reviewing all the corporate documents of Reynolds Designs, all the contracts, all the deeds, everything. And there I discovered something I had forgotten, or rather hadn't given importance to, like 5 years ago. When the business started growing really fast, my dad had given me shares in the company as a way to recognize my work. He was still the majority owner with 47%, but I had 53% in shares that I had been accumulating year after year as part of my compensation. My dad had never given Catherine shares because she didn't work in the business. And there was something else. Something I had done almost instinctively 3 years ago when I started feeling that my dad didn't value my work. I had registered all the core furniture designs under a separate company, of which I was the sole owner, and Reynolds Designs had a licensing agreement with my company to use those designs. The agreement was renewed every year, and basically without those designs, Reynolds Designs couldn't manufacture its best-selling products. At 7 in the morning the next day, I arrived at the office before anyone else and requested an extraordinary board meeting, which was basically my dad, Catherine, me, and our accountant, who acted as secretary. At 10, everyone was sitting there, Catherine in her consultant suit and a folder full of PowerPoints about her strategic plans, my dad looking like he didn't understand why so much urgency, and me with my laptop and an expression that my mom later told me she had never seen on me. Catherine started talking about organizational structures and KPIs, and I simply said, "Enough, Catherine, just shut up for a second." My dad told me not to talk to my sister like that, and I told him we were going to have this conversation once, and that they were going to listen to me until the end, without interrupting me. I explained to them, with documents in hand, that I was the majority shareholder of Reynolds Designs with 53% of the shares. Catherine interrupted me, saying, "That couldn't be correct." And I showed her the share certificates signed by my dad year after year. My dad went pale because I think he genuinely hadn't done the math in his head, or it hadn't mattered to him, while Catherine wasn't in the picture. Then I informed them that all the designs we used, our entire signature collection that represented like 80% of our sales, were registered under my personal company, and that the licensing agreement expired in 2 weeks. Catherine said something about how that was illegal or unethical, and I showed her the licensing contract signed by my dad 3 years ago, where he had been completely in agreement with the arrangement. Then I took out my phone and showed them the emails I had sent that early morning to our 5 largest clients. I basically explaining to them that there were changes in the company's leadership and that I wanted to make sure they were comfortable with the new direction. Most of our contracts had clauses that allowed clients to cancel if there were significant management changes without their consent. 3 of the 5 clients had already responded, saying they had worked with me specifically and wanted to talk about the future of their contracts. Catherine finally understood what was happening and started yelling that I was sabotaging the family business, that I was selfish. How dare I? I sat there super calm and told her that she had decided to play this game when she went up on that stage and proclaimed herself CEO in front of everyone, without having either the legal authority or the business knowledge to do so. My dad tried to mediate, said we were family and had to find a solution, and I told him the solution was very simple. Catherine resigned as co-CEO. I continued managing the company as I had done for 10 years, and we could extend the licensing agreement under terms that protected my work. Catherine said that was ridiculous, that she wasn't going to resign from anything, and I simply got up and said, "Okay, then I won't renew the licensing, and you can explain to the clients why you can't fulfill their orders." I left that conference room with my hands shaking, but my head held high. What followed was like 2 weeks of corporate Cold War. Catherine tried to call clients directly, but most didn't answer or told her they were waiting to talk to me. My dad tried to convince me I was overreacting, that Catherine had only made a communication error at the party. I reminded him that a communication error is confusing a date, not proclaiming yourself CEO and minimizing 10 years of your sister's work in front of 150 people. My mom cried every time I talked to her and begged me to find a way to fix things with Catherine. And I told her there was nothing to fix, because Catherine had shown exactly who she was. In the end, Catherine had no choice but to resign as co-CEO. We announced it internally as a mutual decision where she was going to look for other opportunities that aligned better with her corporate experience, but everyone in the office knew the truth. I renewed the licensing agreement, but now with super specific terms and protection clauses that basically said that if I wasn't the active CEO, the agreement would be automatically canceled. My dad officially retired 2 months later, said he was tired and wanted to enjoy his retirement. But I think he was basically embarrassed about everything that had happened and realized too late that he had bet on the wrong horse. Catherine got a job at some tech startup in California like 3 months later, posted on LinkedIn something about new beginnings and exciting challenges, and basically disappeared from our lives. Well, she didn't disappear completely because my mom insisted that we both go to Christmas dinner that year, which was probably the most uncomfortable experience of my life. Catherine and I basically didn't talk to each other the entire dinner. When she said something, I looked at my plate, and when I spoke, she checked her phone. At one point, my mom asked us to toast to family, and Catherine raised her glass and said yes, to family. Even when some members are more important than others, looking directly at me, I raised my glass and said yes, to family, especially to those who build things instead of trying to steal them. My dad said that's enough, and we basically ate the rest of the evening in silence, while my mom tried to fill the spaces with comments about the weather and Christmas decorations. That was the last time I talked to Catherine. Like 2 years ago now. My mom sends me pictures of her every now and then, like Catherine at her new house in California or Catherine at some networking event, and I just tell her I'm glad she's doing well, but I'm not interested in knowing more. My relationship with my dad is better now, but it's never going to be what it was, if it ever really was anything good. He apologized like 6 months after everything, took me to lunch and told me he had realized he had been unfair to me for years and that he was proud of what I had accomplished. It was a nice moment, I guess, but there are things that apologies can't completely fix. Reynolds Designs is better than ever. Honestly, we billed close to 30 million last year. We have 60 employees, and we just opened a second showroom in another city. Everyone in the company knows exactly who I am and what I've built. There's no ambiguity or people trying to minimize my work. The team is empowered to make decisions, to innovate, to grow, and there's no one trying to play corporate games or steal credit. My mom comes to visit me at the office every now and then and asks if I'm ever going to forgive Catherine, and I honestly don't know what to tell her. It's not even about forgiving. It's about protecting myself from people who showed they're willing to step on you to get what they want, even if that person is your sister. Last week, a journalist from a business magazine came to interview me for an article about successful female entrepreneurs. And at some point, he asked me what had been my biggest challenge in recent years. I told him the whole story, without names but with all the details. And when I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then said it was incredible that I had navigated all that without losing the business. I told him it wasn't incredible, that I had simply done what I had to do to protect what I had built with my own effort for a decade. Sometimes I wonder what everything would have been like if my dad had valued me from the beginning, if Catherine hadn't been so ambitious and manipulative, if my family had been different. But then I realized that all of that led me exactly to where I am now. Running a successful company, surrounded by people who genuinely respect me, and without having to deal with toxic people just because we share DNA. And that, honestly, is priceless.